goop and neutralising the super mutant threat. And for all the Vault Dwellers' efforts, you'd think that they'd be cheered back into Vault 13 as a hero, right? Wrong. The Overseer flat out denies the Vault Dweller entry back into their home on the grounds that he's worried that your actions will inspire future generations to leave the Vault and undermine all the hard work of keeping it going strong. And so Fallout comes to an end with the Vault Dweller exiled back into the wastelands. Which brings us to the year 2197, the year in which Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel takes place. And this is where the timeline gets a little funky, as while Tactics isn't canon, some elements of the story are canon. Let me explain. The main gist of Tactics is that it vastly expands the story behind the Brotherhood of Steel, specifically one of the faction's chapters in the Midwest of America. The game sees you join the Brotherhood as an initiate and help them move across the country from Chicago down to Colorado. Bethesda have outright said that the game isn't a part of the larger franchise's canon, but they have included a few references to the Brotherhood's operations in the Midwest since they took over the series. And all of this is further confused by another game, helpfully called Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, which launched on consoles in 2004 and is also considered totally non-canon. In short, we can largely ignore both of these games in the grand scheme of things. After our non-canonical detour, we're back on the West Coast in the year 2241 for the events of Fallout 2. Here we learn what became of the Vault Dweller after he was exiled in the first game. He eventually settles in a village called Arroyo, where he has a family, and 80 odd years down the line we catch up with one of his descendants, who goes by the grandiose name of the Chosen One.
You are the Chosen One!
Much like their ancestor, the Chosen One is tasked with saving their community, in this case Arroyo, which is suffering from the effects of a devastating drought. And so the Chosen One is sent out into the world to find something that is known as the Garden of Eden kit, or GET for short, a terraforming kit that is capable of creating life out of, well, nothing. Although as the advert says, results may vary. Anyway, the Chosen One ventures out in search of the Gek and eventually comes across the remains of Vault 13, which has now become infested with deathfalls, which are vicious, dinosaur-like beasts. Just a quick word on our old pals at Shady Sands, which the Chosen One can visit in Fallout 2. Not content with being just a thriving community, Shady Sands has become the home and capital of one of Fallout's biggest factions, an organisation known as the New California Republic, or NCR for short. In Fallout terms, they are basically the nearest thing to an actual functioning community. Remember the NCR, they'll become very important further down the line. Upon returning home to report their findings, the Chosen One discovers that Arroyo has been taken over by an organisation called the Enclave, which is basically made up of what's left of the US government. Sitting on a cache of sophisticated technology and weaponry, the Enclave basically tries to rule the US with an iron fist, so naturally they need taking down a peg or two. And so that becomes the Chosen One's core mission: take down the Enclave and save the poor citizens of Arroyo. They set about this by charting a course on a giant freight ship to the Enclave's base of operations, an offshore oil rig where they discover that both the residents of Arroyo and Vault 13 are being held captive. To make matters worse, the Enclave have evolved the nasty FEV from the original game into an airborne virus, which will help them maintain their control over the local populations. The Chosen One naturally throws a spanner into the works though, saves the Arroyo and Vault 13 hostages, and kills the head of the Enclave, who's also the president of the US to boot. And with this happy ending, the combined forces of Vault 13 and Arroyo create a prosperous community together with the aid of a newly found Gek. Just don't mention those devastating death claws. Next up, we're heading back east to Vault 101, the home of the Lone Wanderer from Fallout 3, whose early life we see play out in the prologue of that game. Kicking off in 2258, Fallout 3's prologue starts right at the very beginning of the Lone Wanderer's life, as they're brought into the world and into the arms of their father, voiced by Liam Neeson and his wonderful Irish purr.
A boy, we've got a son, Catherine.
And across the next 16 years, we see the Wanderer grow up, toddling around their playpen, having their 10th birthday, and sitting their GOAT exams as a teenager. Life seems pretty idyllic in Vault 101. Well, as idyllic as you can get for a life underground in the Grim Grey Vault. Naturally, that peace doesn't last. The shit hits the fan in Vault 101 as the Lone Wanderer turns 19 in the year 2277, and this kickstarts the main plot of Fallout 3. Yet, things go sideways for the Wanderer when they're awoken to be told that their father has left the vault, something that has never happened before in Vault 101. Although that'll prove to be a fib, I'll explain shortly. With the Overseer and his men going a little crazy in the circumstances, the Lone Wanderer is forced to flee for their safety and into the surrounding capital wasteland, the irradiated remains of the land surrounding Washington, D.C. Yeah, it's a real out of the frying pan and into the fire moment for our young hero. And so the Lone Wanderer ventures out into the capital wasteland in search of their father, a quest that makes up the main bulk of Fallout 3's story. On their travels through the wasteland, the Wanderer travels to a variety of different settlements. Chief among them, the town of Megaton, named for an unexploded nuclear bomb buried in the foundations of the city, the remnants of Washington, D.C., which houses the Galaxy News radio station and the toppest of top lads, 3-Dog, and a giant battleship that's been rechristened Rivet City. While chatting with Colin Moriarty, one of the inhabitants of Megaton, the Lone Wanderer discovers a great deal more about their parents' history, namely that they weren't actually born in Vault 101, which is actually a double shock as we also discover that 101 was designed never to be opened as part of those sinister social experiments I mentioned earlier. Anyway, as they continue to explore the waste, the Wanderer eventually meets a scientist called Dr. Madison Lee, who worked alongside their father. While chatting to Dr. Lee, we learn that James, the Wanderer's father, was once involved in something known as Project Purity, more on that in just a second, but had to take refuge in Vault 101 in the wake of his partner's death during childbirth. On top of all these meaty revelations, the Lone Wanderer gets embroiled in the power struggle between the two heavyweight factions in the wasteland. The corrupt bureaucratic bastards at the Enclave led by President Henry Eden, whose shock twist is actually an AI, and a splinter group of the Brotherhood of Steel led by the charismatic Elder Owen Lyons. And at the centre of these two warring factions is the aforementioned Project Purity, a giant water processing plant that helps feed a clean water supply to the wider DC area. While you can ally yourself with either faction, along with a whole host of other oddballs and eccentrics across the capital wasteland, you're largely pushed towards joining the Brotherhood after you learn that the Lone Wanderer's father worked with them in the past. All of this eventually leads the Lone Wanderer into taking up their father's mission by seeking out a GEC in order to reignite Project Purity. Amidst helping out with the project, the Wanderer actually tracks down their father to another vault, 112 to be precise, where they have to free him from some bizarre virtual reality nightmare. And with James and the Wanderer reunited, they team up with the good Dr. Lee to resume work on the gestating project. The Enclave has different ideas though, and an ambush led by Henry Eden's right-hand man, Colonel Autumn Augustus, results in James's death when he sacrifices himself to keep the project out of the bureaucrats' hands. The Wanderer eventually hunts down a GEC in Vault 87 with the aid of the Brotherhood of Steel and a top super mutant lad called Forks, if you choose to befriend him that is, but it's all for naught as they're captured by the Enclave when they leave the vault. And this all leads us towards the bombastic conclusion of Fallout 3. You see, after they break free from the shackles of the Enclave, after learning about their dastardly plan to pollute the water supply with a modified anti-mutation variant of the FEV no less, the Wanderer is thrown into a full-scale assault against the Enclave. Joining him in this daring attack is the Brotherhood's poster boy, a big iron giant by the name of Liberty Prime. Yeah, cause nothing hits harder than democracy. Than a giant killer robot. This all leads to a final confrontation with Colonel Augustus, who you can either kill or convince to f*** off. And with the Colonel out the way, the route is clearer to save Project Purity. Or not, the fate of the wasteland is in your hands, you do what you please. As the control center for the project is in the middle of a highly irradiated area, turning it on will kill whoever does so, which leads to yet more life or death decision making. Except that is in the Broken Steel DLC, which added the option to send the Brotherhood Sarah Lyons or your radiation immune buddy Forks to switch the machine on and save the capital wasteland. And if you opt for this ending, the Lone Wanderer wakes up 2 weeks later to witness how the consequences, good or bad, play out across the wastelands. And it's a good thing that they're still alive, as Fallout 3 had a healthy dose of story DLC expansions in the wake of its release. Alongside Broken Steel, there were a total of 5 expansions for Fallout 3, which expanded the story in a number of different directions. Literally. The first took the Lone Wanderer to Anchorage, Alaska, albeit via virtual reality. For a military simulator manipulation of the pivotal moment in Fallout's history where the US took back control of their northernmost territory from the Chinese. Next up, there's the Pit, which saw the Wanderer travel to the remains of Pittsburgh, which has become overrun by raiders and slavers alike. Then there's the meaty Broken Steel expansion, which, as I've already mentioned, altered the ending, raised the game's level cap to 30, and sees the Wanderer root out the remaining members of the Enclave after Liberty Prime is destroyed. The fourth expansion, Point Lookout, takes the Wanderer to the state park of the same name in Maryland, where they have to settle a feud between an irradiated ghoul and a giant talking brain. And if that doesn't sound bonkers enough, Fallout 3 is rounded out with a trip to the Mothership Zeta, a UFO that actually started out life as an Easter egg in both the original Fallout and Fallout 3. And with that, we are done in the capital wasteland. Fallout New Vegas is next up on the timeline, taking us back west to the Mojave Desert and the glowing city of New Vegas, the post-apocalyptic overhaul to the City of Sin. The year is 2281, and unlike the irradiated wastelands we've already visited, New Vegas is a thriving city complete with running water and electricity courtesy of the nearby Hoover Dam. And all of this is because of our good old mate Mr. House, aka Robert House. Yep, the same pre-war Robert House who founded Robco over 200 years ago. He's still knocking about as a result of his defense system shooting down most of the nukes heading for Vegas, and the judicious use of a stasis chamber located within his base of operations in the Lucky 38 casino. And it's from here that he's poured his extensive resources into keeping New Vegas alive and kicking. But his dominion over the city is under threat from a whole host of different factions, all vying for control of New Vegas. For starters, there's our old friends, the New California Republic, who have expanded from their base in Shady Sands, news on that place's fate shortly, to build its empire across the west. The NCR is looking to expand into the Mojave and annex the currently independent New Vegas. However, their resources are divided, with much of their attention put towards combating Caesar's Legion, the antithesis of the NCR, which is an extremist faction that has styled itself on the ancient Roman Empire. Their end goal is basically to wipe out the NCR and enact a military dictatorship over the city of New Vegas, so quite different then. And with both of these major factions vying for power, their primary target becomes the Hoover Dam, which basically controls New Vegas. While the game takes place in 2281, Caesar's Legion made an unsuccessful attempt at taking control of the Hoover Dam in 2277, a conflict that went down in the history books as the First Battle of the Hoover Dam. Anyway, into this chaotic mix falls the Courier, the main protagonist of Fallout New Vegas, who, well, starts off the game with a bullet to the brain. The bullet in question is fired by the dapper gangster Benny, voiced by the late Matthew Perry in an opening sequence that sees the Courier robbed of his quarry, the Platinum Chip, and dumped in a shallow grave. Naturally, the story doesn't end there, or else New Vegas would be a very short game. Rescued by a robot called Securiton Victor, and then nursed back to health by a lovable old lad by the name of Doc Mitchell, the Courier is all patched up and unleashed on the Mojave Desert. And from here, the main quest of Fallout New Vegas kicks in, and at its core, it's relatively simple. Locate and kill Benny and retrieve the Platinum Chip. While the Courier's quest for revenge against Benny might be simple on the surface, it unravels into something a lot more complicated. For starters, Benny is looking to use the Platinum Chip to take New Vegas for himself, right from under the watchful eye of his boss, Mr. House. You see, the Platinum Chip, a pre-war invention, contained an all-important upgrade program that was originally designed to help protect Vegas, but in the wrong hands could completely change the balance of power in the city. And this is where the storytelling of Fallout New Vegas falls into the hands of the player, as there are 4 different endings available depending on what factions you pledge your allegiance to. It all boils down to a great big bloody battle for the Hoover Dam though, with the Courier on the attacking side as part of Caesar's Legion, on the defense with the NCR, as part of a sneaky beaky infiltration with Mr. House, or lastly by taking Benny's mission and claiming New Vegas as an independent territory. Depending on your actions, you get a neat little slideshow of your impacts across New Vegas and the Mojave Desert. But the story of New Vegas doesn't end there, as much like Fallout 3 before it, there was a healthy dose of post-release story content. The story of New Vegas continued across 4 meaty story DLCs, which saw the Courier roped into a variety of different misadventures. The first, Dead Money, whisked the Courier off on a heist within the Sierra Madre Casino on the behalf of a crazed member of the Brotherhood of Steel, while the second, Honest Heart, saw the courier travel to Utah's Zion National Park and get caught up in a tribal war between two different factions. The leader of one of these factions is one Joshua Graham, aka the Burned Man, who is set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon by Kaiser due to his failure to take the Hoover Dam during the first battle. Anyway, he's now a raving mad post-apocalyptic Mormon, as you do. The third expansion is titled Old World Blues and sees the courier kidnapped and sent to the Big MT research facility to take part in a series of heinous scientific experiments by the suspended brains of a group of pre-war scientists. While the fourth expansion, titled Lonesome Road, concludes the story of the courier by taking them to the extremely hostile regions surrounding the Continental Divide. Here they become embroiled in the story of Ulysses, a former courier himself, whose decision to not ferry the platinum ship to Mr. House led to the events that came to be in the main campaign of New Vegas. Long story short, Ulysses has a bit of a bee in his bonnet about the courier and lures our hero to the Divide to enact revenge on them. And naturally, this doesn't end well for Ulysses, who, despite being one of the strongest characters in the entirety of the Fallout franchise, finally gets his comeuppance, which brings the story of New Vegas and the courier to an end. Right, it's finally time to catch back up with our old friend the Sole Survivor, who we last saw over 2 centuries ago when they were cryogenically frozen within Vault 111. It's not a happy reunion for our nuclear family though, as at some point before the Sole Survivor is awoken from their cryogenic slumber, they witness the murder of their spouse and the kidnap of tiny little Sean to boot. And so the main quest of Fallout 4 kicks off, which in a similar vein to Fallout 3 is all about the rescue of a family member. Couple this with the Fallout TV show, which we'll get to shortly, and we're starting to see something of a trope develop. Anyway, the Sole Survivor ventures off into the Commonwealth, the irradiated wastes of the city of Boston and its surroundings, and experiences something of a Fallout greatest hits, all within the first hour of the game. Befriend a new K9 companion? Check. Meet a new faction? Check. Don some power armor and fight a death lord? Double check. After this breathless intro, the Sole Survivor makes their way to Diamond City, a township located within the remains of Fenway Park, the old baseball stadium of the Boston Red Sox. And it's here that they start to hear whisperings of Fallout 4's big bad. No, not the lad who kidnapped Sean, but a secretive organisation that goes by the name of the Institute. The rumours that surround the Institute talk about a terrorist group of sorts who go around the Commonwealth kidnapping ordinary folk and replacing them with synths, basically human-like synthetic robots. The Sole Survivor gets caught up in the machinations of the Institute when they finally locate their son's kidnapper, a lad called Conrad Kellogg. Kellogg is a means to an end though, as he reveals that Sean is now in the possession of the Institute, which means that the Sole Survivor will have to venture into the belly of the beast. Only that's easier said than done, as the Sole Survivor soon finds out. They discover that the only way into the Institute is via teleportation, and in order to build a working teleporter, they have to ally themselves with one of the game's 3 anti-Institute factions. For starters, there's the Minutemen, the faction that the Sole Survivor meets in that mad intro, and who are styled after American Revolutionary War soldiers. Then there's the iconic Brotherhood of Steel,